He'd say you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. You've got to be your own man, not a puppet on a string. Never compromise what's right and uphold your family name. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. Now we might have been better off or on the bigger house if Daddy done more giving in or a little more backing down. But we always had plenty just to live in his advice. Whatever you do today, you'll have to sleep with tonight. Not a puppet on a string. Never compromise what's right and uphold your family name. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. I know that things are different and they were in Daddy's day, but I still believe what makes a man really hasn't changed. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. You've got to be your own man, not a puppet on a string. Never compromise what's right and uphold your family name. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. You've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program is about to begin.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment is the very basis of our country. Wars have been fought because of the First Amendment. It's something that we have to protect. And that's why I joined the United States Marine Corps. Even if you don't agree with what the other person says, they have the right to say it. The First Amendment has protected millions of Americans since our inception. Abolition, women's movement, civil rights, freedom of speech is what gave each of these groups the platform to stand. Even if the other side didn't want them to vote or didn't want them to be free, they had this inalienable right. But over the years, our right to free speech has been under attack. On college campuses, students shut down people they disagree with. The media censors unpopular opinions. The IRS can silence conservative groups, and that's a scary thing. The U.S. government has lost respect for the First Amendment. People who speak up face retaliation. My case is a prime example of that. I started working at the Phoenix VA hospital in January of 2012. During my time at the Phoenix VA, I lost 6 veterans to suicide. Every time that a veteran commits suicide, it's like being punched in the gut. I had went to my supervisor saying I thought I was going to come forward, and she said her exact words, "That's how people get fired." I was instantly blackballed. I was forced to work with this social worker that went through my medical records. They go through our medical records to try to discredit us for different mental health issues. It keeps other whistleblowers from ever daring to speak up. On April 20th, 2015, I received a gag order forbidding me from speaking to any Phoenix VA employees. It would have been illegal, according to that order, for me to get care as a disabled veteran of the United States. Think of how many gag orders they've placed on people. That's the scary thing. This is against my First Amendment rights. Think of how many people they've shut up. 4 days later, the Phoenix VA reversed course and sent me a letter. The letter acknowledged my right to free speech under the Constitution of the United States. That was a good day. That letter was vindication. You know, it was one of the best days out of 400 days of hell. I think that suppression of free speech that's happened at the VA can and does happen within other parts of the government. My case is a prime example of why the government cannot be trusted with the private information of its citizens. They went through my medical records and tried to say that I wasn't fit to be a counselor. If that's just one snippet of the government, think of what's going on out there and what they're doing to their citizens. I decided to align with Concerned Veterans for America because we have similar views on what needs to be done. That came to me when I didn't know what to do yet and stepped to the plate to get my voice out there and to help me speak for people that nobody was listening to. I'm still sitting here, you know, over 2 years later, continuing the fight with their help. Veterans didn't sacrifice to be silenced by our own government. We have to defend the first.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage U.S. Army Ranger and Concerned Veterans for America Executive Director, Mark Lucas.
Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to our Defend the First event hosted by CVA with our special guest, Congressman Gowdy. This event is being hosted on our website and live streamed all across the internet on defendthefirst.org. If you'd like to engage with us on social media, you can follow us at Concerned Veterans on Twitter, and you can utilize the hashtag #DefendTheFirst. It's great to be back in South Carolina. My staff and I see many familiar faces. And for those of you that are new to our family, welcome. I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what Concerned Veterans for America is all about. And what we want to do is we want to advocate for policy to preserve the freedom and the prosperity that we and our families fought for to defend. Now, as a military commander, I always look for a task and for a purpose. And that task is to advocate policy. What's that mean? Well, Concerned Veterans for America does that by building a true volunteer grassroots network. We understand that CVA, the most important person in our organization, is you, the volunteer. Folks who, after work on Monday night, come to see Congressman Gowdy talk about the First Amendment. Hardworking Americans who, after a day of work or over the weekend, come into a CVA field office to knock on doors and to make phone calls to advocate for the policies that will enhance a veteran's quality of life for him or her and their family. Now, if you want to look at a great grassroots leader, you can look no farther than right here in South Carolina. We have an amazing state director who has amassed a statewide network of volunteers. And Daniel Brennan, please stand up to be recognized. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. And one of the issues that we weigh in on is VA reform. And unfortunately, it seems a day does not go by where we don't read about an atrocity at a VA hospital. Just recently down in the state of Florida, a veteran was left for dead in a shower for several hours. In the state of Wisconsin, thousands of servicemen and women were exposed to disease because of unclean procedures. In my home state of Iowa, 2 different veterans on 2 different occasions went to check themselves into the VA, only to be turned away. Both those soldiers committed suicide. Concerned Veterans for America understands that we need real reform at the VA, and we're going to do that in 3 different ways. First, we need to have accountability. It's important for these bureaucrats who protect secret wait lists that allow veterans to die, that they're not promoted and that they're not given bonuses like they have in the past. We need to fire those bureaucrats. We also need choice. We as veterans, we're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice and give our lives for this country. I think it's important for us to be able to have the choice to decide where to get our health care, and also to have the choice of when to be seen. Waiting 30 days to see a doctor is absolutely unacceptable. And lastly, transparency. We believe at Concerned Veterans for America that an open and a transparent government makes for a better government. And we need to shine a bright light of transparency on every government institution. Just recently, an investigative journalist from the USA Today reported that there were secret ratings of VA hospitals that they did not want to reveal to the public. So it's important for us to advocate for VA reform. When we opened up this event this evening, we had a very powerful video about the story of Brandon Coleman. And Brandon's been a great friend to CVA, a true patriot, a combat veteran, a Marine, who, by the way, has 3 children that are currently serving the Marine Corps currently. And he came all the way out from Arizona to be here with us to launch his Defend First event. Let's hear it for Brandon Coleman. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Like I said, Brandon's a true patriot. He went overseas and he fought for this country as a Marine. He came back home and he decided to fight for the future of America in a different way. And he wanted to go and work for the VA to help his brothers and sisters. He saw travesty after travesty and he decided to stand up. He decided to do the right thing. And unfortunately, he had a gag order placed on him. They told him that he couldn't talk to anybody. They went through his medical records. And his case not only shows about the systemic failures of veteran care at the VA, but it also highlights maybe an even more disturbing fact about what's going on in our government today, about our Constitution, about the First Amendment. He had those rights taken away from him. Brandon Coleman is just one person. Imagine the hundreds or thousands of people within the VA, within the IRS, good, hardworking Americans. I know a lot of times we say bureaucrat, almost like a 4-letter word, but there are public servants out there in our government who want to do the right thing. And imagine how many of them had a gag order placed on them. So Brandon's story really illustrated how we need to attack, how we need to address this problem about the Constitution and the First Amendment, because it's under attack every single day. Just recently, United States Senator Harry Reid was on the floor of the United States Senate, and he was debating the merits of the First Amendment. In our United States Senate, he was debating the merits of free speech. We've got legislators and politicians all across the country, not just at the federal level, but in all the 50 states who are fighting for legislation to silence people that hold them accountable. So we saw this as being a disturbing trend. And at Concerned Veterans for America, and with our volunteer network across the country, we as veterans have a special relationship with the Constitution. We have a special relationship with the First Amendment. We're willing to deploy to far-off lands and give everything, including our life, for this republic that we love. So we understand the Constitution. We understand the First Amendment. We've been off in far-off lands where they don't have a freedom of speech. People are jailed. They're executed. They're not able to freely express themselves or their religion. And we saw that every single day in combat. So we want to make sure that those same type of things don't happen here in America. And as we're looking at building this initiative, we knew we had to have champions like Brandon and other folks across the country to join arms with us. And when I looked at Congress, I couldn't have thought of a better partner. The first name that came to mind was Congressman Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. Like I mentioned before, I'm from the state of Iowa. Congressman Gowdy is an absolute rock star because he has been a champion for us. He's been a champion for veterans. He's a very skilled attorney that understands the importance of our Constitution, understands the First Amendment. He was there with us shoulder to shoulder in Congress as he fought to hold the IRS accountable. He's voted for several measures for increased VA accountability. He's a great champion, and please join me in welcoming Congressman Trey Gowdy. Thank you, sir. I'll put you right there.
Thank you. Thank y'all. How are y'all? How are y'all?
Well, sir, thank you so much for joining us.
I wish my wife could have heard your introduction to me. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to open up with a really broad question. And you've been a skilled attorney, you've been in Congress since 2010. I wanted to get what your impression is, what your definition is of free speech.
Well, I'm cursed by having been to law school, so I have to kind of explain away my answer partly from that. I view the First Amendment, the entire Bill of Rights, as a limitation on what the federal government can do, and then through, without getting into it too terribly deeply, through the doctrine of incorporation, it then applies also to the state. So I view the First Amendment as a limitation on what the federal government can keep you from doing, all right? So against that backdrop, it's a limitation on the federal government's power. With very limited exceptions, you have the right to say whatever you want to say. And I say with very few limitations, I cannot cite the lyrics to a U2 song and claim them as my own.
You wouldn't want to.
There's one, I don't know. One is a really good song. I can't, in a crowded room, yell fire. I can't, if you're not a public official, libel you. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, I view free speech as a limitation on the federal or state government's ability to restrict what I say. Now, I got to give you the other half of it, though. For every right that we have, and by the way, thank you to every veteran or every family member of every veteran for fighting to make sure that we got them in the first place and that we've kept them for 200 plus years. The best way I can compliment you and thank you for what you've done is to be a responsible steward of the rights that you have helped protect. So for every right we have, the right for me to say whatever I want, I think as a citizen comes a corresponding responsibility that I exercise that right judiciously. And when it comes to speech, I am welcome to tell you Dallas lost last night in the football game. I'm welcome to tell you that. There's no prohibition against me telling you that Dallas lost to Tampa Bay last night. It's just wrong. So I have the right to tell you something that is wrong. But as a responsible citizen, I have to use that right judiciously and responsibly. That's the way I view free speech.
And the Founding Fathers had a clear understanding of how important freedom of speech is, and I wanted to read the First Amendment really quickly. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. What do you think our Founding Fathers were thinking about when they crafted the First Amendment? And possibly, what were they trying to prevent?
Well, our Founding Fathers were skeptical of government in general. But if you look back to even before our Constitution, look back to the Declaration of Independence, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All right, truth's not a word we hear a lot in our modern day culture. But to the extent that they believed that there was something called the truth, how do you identify that truth? And to them, I think it was an identification of truth through the process of speech. So this may seem like a nuanced point, but I hope it's not. These are not rights that they gave us. These are rights that they believed we already had that government could not take away. So you have the right to free speech. Government cannot take that away except in very limited circumstances. You have the right to assemble. Again, think of this as government versus individual. What you do in your private lives, if you own a radio station, I don't have a right to break into your radio station and host your 4 o'clock show. That's private to private. This is a government versus citizen interaction. They were skeptical of government. we got the 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, as a negotiation because they were so skeptical of government. In order to get the Constitution ratified, some insisted on the Bill of Rights, the first 10. So to the extent that you believe there's something called the truth, it helps us find it when you have the right, without fear of punishment from government, to say what you think is true.
Absolutely. And we've seen that free speech has spawned a lot of important historic moments. Abolition, civil rights movement, the women's movement. These are important moments that have really defined us as a nation. Can you talk a little bit more about how freedom of speech has defined American history through your lens?
Well, you've listed 3 pretty seminal points in our country's history. Abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, war. Those of you who went to war, I cannot imagine what it was like to have people protest you when you left, protest you when you came back, and protest you while you were overseas serving. I cannot imagine a more frustrating feeling than trying to preserve and protect someone's right who's criticizing me in the process of my service. But our founding fathers thought it was important enough to put up with the inconvenience of being criticized to give citizens the right to say, I don't think we should have pursued this war. I don't think we should pursue it in this way. Speech, to me, is the ability to speak truth to power without consequence. And lots of cultures do not have that. I mean, think about North Korea. How would you like to say what was on your mind there? You don't even want to be in that guy's family. You have a way of getting shot with a ballistic missile if you just aren't complimentary enough of the leader of North Korea. You have the right to criticize the President of the United States. You have the right to criticize the President-elect of the United States. Almost every transformative period in our country is preceded by someone deciding, I am going to speak truth to power. And the basis of that is your First Amendment right to say what you want without consequence of government, with very few exceptions.
Absolutely. You know, I read that you used to deliver newspapers as a kid, and I'm sure you haven't always had a pleasant relationship with the news media, but we know that the media is a very important part of any democracy, and it's what separates us from those totalitarian governments like you were mentioning before, that we've got to respect both sides. What do you think, and I know we're talking a little bit backstage about this, what do you think is the current state of the freedom of press right now?
Wow, this is the season of miracles, and I'm supposed to be nice the week heading into Christmas. I'll say this at the outset, just like believe it or not, there are good and bad members of Congress. I'm kidding. They're good and bad field goal kickers. They're good and bad dentists. They're good and bad almost everything. There are folks in the media that, regardless of whether or not I agree with their personal orthodoxy, are professional and they do a really good job. And then there are those that, to me, have lost all pretense of objectivity. Just in the interest of full disclosure, and I'm to the point in life where I can say what I want to say, and I'm not fearful of the consequences of it. I've been really disappointed in the media since I've been in Congress. I think there is a blurring of the line between the opinion page and the news page. And I can take you to the headlines on almost any website on the internet right now, and you will say, well, that's opinion. That's subjective, not objective. There was an article written over the weekend about one of my friends, Mick Mulvaney, who's the new OMB nominee under President-elect Trump. Just terrible. And so, yeah, they have the right. Again, I would tell them with that comes a responsibility. They have the right to print it. You have the right to decide whether or not you think it's right or whether or not you agree with it. And quite frankly, you have the right whether or not to read it. So increasingly, I think we're voting with our telephone dials and whether or not we re-up our subscriptions or whether or not we go to certain websites. The media has a unique place in our culture. they are given rights that the rest of us don't have. Think about New York Times versus Sullivan. That's a Supreme Court given protection as they're going about doing their jobs. But with that comes a corresponding responsibility. Let me just summarize my frustration with the media this way. Nobody has breakfast plans, do they? There's a difference between being balanced and being accurate. If I were writing a balanced article, I could say, person X believes Senator Tim Scott is the most handsome person in the world. Person Y believes Senator Tim Scott is the least most handsome person in the world. That's a balanced article. Both are wrong, but it's a balanced article. He's closer to being the most than the least. But you see what I'm saying? That's balance. That to them, they've done their job. They have quoted this person who's wrong and this person who's equally wrong, therefore it's balanced. I think the goal ought to be accurate, not to be balanced. And there is a movement within the media now that it is more important to be first than to be right. So, as a member of the least popular profession on the face of the earth, I think it would do them well to analyze why they would be increasingly giving us a run for our money as to who the least popular entity on earth is. The polling I see indicates people trust and believe the media less than ever before. Is that your fault or is that their fault? And if it's their fault, maybe they ought to, again, I started by saying with every freedom is a corresponding responsibility. Maybe they ought to ask themselves whether they are judiciously and responsibly exercising their freedom.
Now, you talked about balance and a little bit about editorialization, but in the past, the media has had a really important job in holding the government accountable. Have you seen that in your time during Congress?
They still do. I have said all along, there are three entities in our society that provide oversight: Congress, the media, and the voters. The voters get to do it every 2 years. Congress gets to do it, but then that leads to your frustration of why didn't anything ever happen? Y'all don't ever put anybody in jail. You don't ever fire anybody. And what we ought to do is tell you up front, we can't put anybody in jail. And we can't fire anybody in the executive branch, which leaves the media to provide the oversight. So I want you to think back in your mind over the last 6 or 8 years. The president doesn't like the word scandal, but let's just use the word scandal because I can't think of a synonym that he would like more. Fast and Furious, Benghazi, IRS, VA. You satisfied with the job the media's done? Are you satisfied with the depth and breadth? They are breathless in their desire for a select committee on Russian involvement in the American electoral process. But I was talking to my very good friend and handsome friend, Tim Scott, this afternoon. I do not recall them being that breathless in calling for a select committee on Planned Parenthood or Benghazi. Those are two things the House decided to have a select committee on. They delegitimized both of those select committees before they were even formed. So they have a responsibility to provide oversight. I just wish they would do it on both parties, both administrations, and I wish they would do it with just a little more pretense of objectivity.
Sure. I want to talk about how free speech can impact a healthy economy. And we've seen that with free speech, it creates a marketplace of ideas. It allows for creative destruction. And we've seen, countries like Cuba, totalitarian governments that don't have a freedom of speech and have a horrible economy. How do you believe that free speech drives innovation? And what do you believe would happen to the American economy if we lost our freedom of speech?
Well, you and I could start a company today and compete with Apple. I would not recommend either one of us doing that, but we could do that. And you have the power to advertise. You have the power to tout and laud the attributes of your product. But keep in mind, we started off by talking about, I like to hedge it like a lawyer, with certain limitations. What can you and I not do? We cannot claim that our product can do things it cannot do. I cannot claim that Copenhagen cures baldness. If it did, I would still be dipping, but we can't claim that. It's not true. I cannot infringe on your copyright or trademark. I can't, steal Coke's formula. So there is the freedom of being in an economy like ours, where you can start a business tomorrow, you can advertise, you can, within certain boundaries, tout and laud the attributes of your business. But again, under the heading, and I think our founding fathers were as genius as mortal human beings can be, they also understood the objective at the end is this thing they call truth. And speech is best if it is calculated towards driving us in that direction. Part of an open economy is your right to make claims that are suspicious or dubious. So our responsibility as the recipients of these rights and as co-citizens is to remain educated and vigilant. And that way we can separate out the claims that are accurate from the ones that are not. What our founding fathers would say is we don't want government doing it. Government is not the person to sort out what is true and what is not true. One little final example, and then we'll move on to the next question. Let's assume that in the field of pharmaceuticals, you as parents, and nobody here is old enough to be a grandparent, but in 20 or 30 years, when you become a grandparent, you want to be able to rely on what a pharmaceutical company tells you a drug can do and cannot do, and what the side effects are and what they are not. You want to be able to rely on that. There is an argument, the libertarians would say the market sorts that out, the economy sorts that out. Others would say, no, you need an objective entity, you need an FDA, you need someone to test the claims made of this product. Again, the end is you getting the truth. That is the end objective. The question is, how many filters do you have to go through before you can rely on that end objective? Even with what I'm sure seem to be regulations and burdens and obstacles in our marketplace, you'd still rather be in this economy than any other economy on the face of the earth.
I liked one of the comments you just made about the founding fathers being geniuses as mortal men. You've been in Congress for a little bit. How many of your fellow congressmen agree with you on that the founding fathers knew what was best for the future of America, and how many of them, in your estimation, is trying to overturn a lot of what they did?
Well, I think it boils down to how you view that foundational document. If you view it as, some of my colleagues do, as a living, breathing document that can be reinterpreted with each generation, that's problematic in a culture where you have multiple generations being represented. My parents may have interpreted it a certain way, my daughter interprets it another. It's tough to live in a country where you got 4 different interpretations of the same document. Our founding fathers also gave us a process by which we could amend the Constitution. We've had almost 30 amendments to that. In some instances, we'll change it and then change it back, like prohibition. But they at least gave us the process by which to change, whether it is the right of all people to vote, which was not in the original document, whether it's the right of women to vote. There were lots of things that we have decided to change along the way. But it is a document that has withstood 2 world wars, a Cold War, 9/11, and a Civil War. And that document has stood the test of time. So is it perfect? There's only one book that fits that description, and it wasn't written by Americans. Save that document, save that book with 66 books in it, if that gives you a hint. Save that one. It is, when I think about, well, we saw it today. You saw it today. The easy thing for me to say is whoever gets the majority of the votes in this room is the new president, whoever he or she is. Our founding fathers didn't do that. They gave you an electoral college. Some of my colleagues like the electoral college, some of them don't. It depends on whether or not their gal or guy won. We ought to have a little more commitment to principle than just that. I like the electoral college even if the result had been different. If my candidate had won the popular vote but lost the electoral college, I understand why our framers gave it to us. I would just settle for more of my colleagues, first of all, reading the document. Second of all, not confusing it with the Declaration of Independence or a poem by Robert Frost. If they'll just read it, particularly with in mind what our framers were worried about. They were worried about the power of government, which is why they placed these limitations. So it has lasted, like I said, it has survived a lot of things that a lot of other countries could not have survived. It will work if we will apply it consistently. And one more example that I find interesting, and I won't go into the details of it because you're free to have whatever opinion you want to have on the issue of marriage. Your definition of marriage is none of my business. The notion that a Supreme Court justice can identify a liberty right that the rest of us have missed for the past 200 years is not humble, shall we say. The notion that someone, if you want to go to a legislative floor and debate the issue of marriage, have at it. Do the same thing with the death penalty. You can do the same thing with a host of other issues. But to have unelected people discover liberty rights within the penumbra, whenever you're using the word penumbra, something ain't going well. Because that's not a word we use in our everyday language. When you discover in the penumbra of the Fourth Amendment a liberty right that the rest of us were too stupid to know existed, that's when people begin to get frustrated with our current constitutional republic. So the tools are there. If you want to change death penalty, go argue it to your state legislature. Go argue it to Congress. You want to define marriage differently in Vermont than South Carolina? Go make the argument through the democratic process. This blurring of the lines between the branches is not good. It's not good. And it's not good when we do it. It's not good when they do it. They wanted there to be tension between the branches, not the political parties, the branches. Hamilton worried that the judiciary would be the weakest of the three. He need not worry if Aaron Burr had not killed him. He need not worry. The weakest of the three is the legislative branch. And that was the one the framers wanted to be the strongest of the three. So we've gotten it out of orbit.
I like to talk about freedom of speech as a matter of privacy, because a lot of times they go hand in hand. We're able as private citizens to support any charity that we want and not to reveal that information to the government. We can post anonymous comments online about the ideas that we have. We have to vote on election day and keep that vote private. And the founders seem to really have an admiration for anonymous speech, especially when you look at the Federalist Papers and how they're published anonymously. Can you talk a little bit about why protecting American privacy has been so important to you throughout your career?
Well, the fear of retaliation, the fear of retribution. If you are a whistleblower, if you are one person in an entity that has 10,000, like the IRS, if you are a group dedicated to informing people about their constitutional rights, and you have to go to something that, frankly, is probably the agency that most Americans fear. It'd be tough between the FBI and the IRS. I'm scared of both of them. But the IRS just strikes fear in people's hearts. And then you have an entity that powerful deciding whether or not we're going to grant status to you, whether we're going to, in some instances, insist that you give us the names of your donors. In some instances, who comes to your meetings? That is the stuff out of countries that we're not familiar with. Now, I will say this, just to be a contrarian and to be a lawyer. It's the reason everyone hates us. And I'm going to tell you why everyone hates us. For me to be able to evaluate whether or not what you say has merit or not, I'm going to want to cross-examine you. I'm going to want to know, do you have a financial interest in what you're saying? Are you biased? Are you telling me how wonderful a certain person is and that certain person happens to be your son and you happen to be their mother? They may still be wonderful, but I want to know. So as we go on this journey called the truth, I do think you are free to factor in whether or not someone is letting it be known who they are. Government is not free to single out anonymous private speech for punishment and then as part of that punishment make it public. Last example, let's assume you and I went on a message board and we defamed someone. Remember, we started by saying with few episodic exceptions, you don't have the right to defame someone. So if you and I did it anonymously, through the court system, can we identify who that person is so we know who to sue? The answer is yes. Can government do it to intimidate you or punish you? The answer is no.
You mentioned a great point about retaliation. And it seems that over the last 8 years under the Obama administration, there was no end to how far they would take retaliation. Take Brandon's case at the VA. A veteran that served overseas trying to help current veterans was being retaliated against. And then you saw with one of your colleagues, Congressman Chaffetz, and how he was retaliated against in regards to the Secret Service. My question is, and I would like you to talk a little bit more about the Chaffetz incident, but if a powerful sitting congressman can face retaliation, what's that mean for the rest of us?
It infuriated me. I do not like when strong people pick on weak people. It's one of my pet peeves is bullying. I just don't like it. Chaffetz is a member of Congress, you're right. He can speak up for himself, he can defend himself. If you are an employee of the Forestry Service and you're having to pick between whether or not to say that your supervisor is sexually harassing you or not, and you fear retaliation and retribution, it just infuriates me. No woman should ever have to pick between exposing a crime and keeping her job. You should never have the same, whether it's the VA. This speaking truth to power carries with it implicitly the absence of consequence if you do so. Chaffetz, for those of you who don't know, Chaffetz has an interesting past before he got to Congress. He was a field goal kicker at BYU. But then when they made you keep your helmet on while you're on the field, he lost interest in that because nobody could see who he was. So he went and worked for a cosmetics company in Utah. He's one of my best friends in politics, so I feel comfortable saying this. But along the way, his family worked in federal law enforcement. So when Jason and his wife Julie were trying to sort out, okay, what's the next chapter, he applied with the Secret Service. He thought it'd be a really cool job to protect the president's life, first lady, vice president. So he applied. Fast forward in life, he's the chairman of a committee that's providing oversight over the Secret Service. And I'm biased in favor of police officers. I confess that up front, but that doesn't mean they're perfect. And if you have someone breach the fence at the White House, if you have someone get too close to the president, somebody's got to look into it and figure out how that happened. It's Jason's job to do it. So what did they do when he decided to hold hearings? They went and pulled his file, his personnel file. It's nobody's business whether or not you apply with a federal agency. You should not live in fear that government is going to 20 years later try to embarrass you because you wanted to serve in some capacity or another and were rejected. Let's imagine that you raised your hand and said, I want to serve my country in the Army. And you didn't qualify because you have a health issue. 20 years later, you're welcome to criticize the Army without the government seeking to embarrass you by disclosing your personnel file. But they tried it with Chaffetz. 40 some odd people got their hands on that file. Listen, Jason is a Mormon from Utah. If you think you're going to find something interesting in his personnel file, you have lost your mind. You are better off, seriously, reading the dictionary for enjoyment than you are reading his personnel file. There's nothing there. But it's none of government's business. And we say government like it's some entity. It is an amalgamation of people, some person in the Secret Service that you granted the imprimatur of the U.S. government decided to do it. There is no entity called government. There are people who work for the government. And some of them made very, very, very bad decisions for which there should be consequences, which gets to the next point. The consequences were completely underwhelming of those who accessed and breached Jason's file. Just like the consequences of maladministration at the VA, just like with the IRS targeting scandal. Can you name a single person who lost his or her job involuntarily? I don't mean retiring. I mean involuntarily lost their job. No, you can't. I don't like bullies. I don't like it when people pick on people when the situation is not equal. And with government versus whistleblower is not equal.
You mentioned briefly the IRS. Can you explain to us what happened there? And is that scandal even over?
Jimmy Jordan, who's another good friend of mine and a colleague from Ohio, has spearheaded that for us on House oversight. The IRS targeting scandal, if you want to form an advocacy group to educate people about the Constitution or educate people about global warming, whatever you want, it's none of the government's business what your purpose of your advocacy is. They're going to ask you what percentage of your time is dedicated to social advocacy or information sharing, and what percentage of your time is dedicated towards politics. And if that percentage falls in line with regulations, you receive tax-exempt status. So let's assume this crowd over here on the right wants to form a social advocacy group under 501c3 to educate your fellow citizens about their Fifth Amendment rights. If you qualify, you receive tax-exempt status. What the IRS was doing is they set up a filter that identified names that are synonymous with conservatism. Tea Party, freedom. They even included Constitution. I don't know why they felt that way, but it says a lot about them that they consider that to be conservative groups. But they set up a different path to being confirmed or approved for conservative groups than they did liberal groups. Remember Lois Lerner? It all started with her. It actually started with the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, that the president criticized the Supreme Court during the State of the Union, said they got it wrong. You remember Alito shaking his head no? That was the opinion. So Lois Lerner hears the president criticize Citizens United. They set up this method by which they're going to judge your application differently than they do other people's applications. It is the government discriminating based on the content of your speech. Imagine the sheriff in your hometown stopping cars that had a Clemson sticker but not a South Carolina sticker. It's no different. It's him deciding, I'm going to pick this group to favor and this group to punish. And they did it, and they would have gotten away with it. Some of the groups, you ask, is it still going on? Some of the groups still have not heard back. It is, number one, the government telling you you have to do this to receive tax-exempt status. Okay, that's fine. You can debate that. What is beyond debate is government cannot discriminate based on whether or not they like the speech. And if you look at the emails, the few that they didn't manage to destroy, if you look at the emails, Lerner is lamenting Republican wins. She is celebrating Democrat when she says we need to come up with a plan, but make sure it's not political. They were trying to get around Citizens United. They were trying to punish conservative groups. They got caught. They got away with it because up until January 20th of 2017, we don't control the executive branch. But that changes. You had the chief executive. Think back to the Super Bowl Sunday. Bill O'Reilly's interviewing the chief executive, the person who took an oath of office to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And he said there's not a smidgen of corruption. This is why the investigation's ongoing. And they get mad at us for prejudging things. He did it in front of God and everybody, in front of the largest television viewing audience in the history of the world, the Super Bowl. So no, the executive branch, there are consequences to not being able to win elections. And if you don't control the executive branch, you can have all the hearings in the world and you can write all the articles you want. Nobody's going to be held accountable in the sense that you may mean it unless it's the executive branch enforcing it. There was a criminal referral on Lois Lerner by a committee of Congress. Ways and Means referred the matter to the United States Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution, and it got nowhere. So if anyone wonders whether or not, who was it that said there are consequences to elections? Oh yeah, there are.
You know, during the IRS scandal, you famously said with Lois Lerner, quote, "The same Constitution that allows her the right, if she wants to sit there and say nothing, allows these groups the right to petition their government for redress." And I think you made an interesting point that freedom of speech protects everyone's speech. It's not conservative, it's not liberal, it's not who holds the executive branch, it's bigger than that. And even some of that speech that's unpopular is still protected. And we talked about how the ACLU has defended free speech. Sometimes it's not popular, whether it's defending communists or flag burners, which, by the way, CVA does not support at all. But we understand that the defense of that unpopular speech is so important, so they don't come after our own personal speech. Why is it so important to defend this unpopular speech, in your opinion?
I don't know if it was Reinhold Niebuhr or who it was that said, you know, first they came after the trade unions, but there were no trade unions. I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't object. And then they came after the Catholics, and I wasn't a Catholic, so I didn't object. And then they came after the Jewish community, but I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't object. And then they came after me, and there was no one left to object. It's very different. Look, I may disagree on what's defined as speech and what's not. Reasonable minds can differ on, you know, what's defined as speech. What there can never be a difference of opinion on is that you should have the right to say things that I fundamentally disagree with, and government should not censor it based on the content of the speech. Because today the sun may shine on me, but it's not going to shine that way all the time. Tomorrow, they may want to censor what I'm saying. So it is best, look, we're going to disagree on what is defined as speech. But you should have the right, and I should zealously defend your right to say crazy, wrong things. I can argue that nobody should listen to you, and I would argue that. It's very different from me arguing government should keep you from saying it. What I found most, just not most, because there were a lot to choose from in the IRS targeting scandal, I really had hoped some of my colleagues on the other side would have seen this more as a speech issue and less as a political issue. Because if the IRS can target people based on their political orthodoxy, then can the Department of Agriculture under a Republican administration reward people based on their political orthodoxy? I mean, once government starts rewarding people based on that, our republic is just, it's finished, it's gone. So I did note the irony of Ms. Lerner reading a statement and then claiming she wasn't going to answer any questions because she did waive her Fifth Amendment
Was
privilege.
that just an off-the-cuff statement?
You know what? I slept through most of con law, but I do remember this little. I mean, I was a prosecutor for 16 years. It'd be great if you could testify, I did not rob the bank. And by the way, I'm not going to answer any of the prosecutor's questions about why my fingerprints are on the demand note, why I'm on the video surveillance, and why you found the money in my bedroom. I'm not going to answer any of those questions. I'm just going to tell you I didn't do it. The world isn't wired that way. So for her to say I did nothing wrong, but I'm not going to answer any of your questions, you can't do that in a courtroom. I felt sorry for the groups that all they wanted to do was inform other people of their Fifth Amendment right. She had a bunch of high-priced lawyers to remind her she didn't have to say anything. The irony of her hiding behind the Fifth Amendment while she sought to discriminate against groups that wanted to educate other people about their Fifth Amendment rights was just more than I could handle at that particular point. So, but she's gone, she's retired, and because the executive branch saw no criminal conduct without sanction.
You know, there seems to be a really disturbing trend that the government gets bigger and bigger and more powerful. And the shift of balance is leaving us, we the people, and going to these government bureaucrats where they have no problem prosecuting us and sending us to jail. But people that just because they're a government employee, they're protected. How can we shift that balance? Is it just the executive branch, as you mentioned, or is it a longer-term type of initiative?
Well, not to put the 4 or 5 people who are still awake asleep, also by using the phrase constitutional equilibrium, it's out of whack. The legislative branch has surrendered, frankly, the biggest tool we have, which is appropriations. Our framers gave us appropriations. We just passed another CR/omnibus in December. So we've surrendered our ability to hold people accountable with appropriations. The Senate has advice and consent. We'll see how and what way they use that next year. So the equilibrium among the branches is out of whack. The executive branch is more powerful than the other two right now. And if you want to hold people accountable in the way that most people in the audience think hold accountable, they think go to jail. You said go to jail. All right? There's only one branch of government that can put anybody in jail. It's the executive branch. And you can't make them do it. Yeah, I disagree with Comey's conclusions, but there's nothing I can do other than hold a hearing and tell you I disagree with Comey's conclusions. I can't overrule them. A little bit of it is the out of whack equilibrium. A lot of it is our framers, I don't think, ever envisioned government to be the size that it is. So what I would tell my friends to do and the people I work for in this district is whenever you hear something proposed, ask yourself, first of all, is it a good idea? Is it an idea for which the government should be involved? And if the answer to both of those is yes, at what level? At what level? We're focused on the First Amendment tonight, 9th and 10th. The powers that are not given to the federal government belong to you, the people, and then they belong to the states in the 10th Amendment. What's wrong with the state implementing a good idea? What's wrong with Greenville County implementing a good idea? Federal government is so big. That's why people are fearful of challenging it. That's why it appears as if the playing field is not level. It's not. Federal government is gigantic. And if you're trying to weigh and balance, look, I'm a CIA contractor. I'm a Department of State contractor. I'm a DOD contractor, and I want to let people know that this is going on and this is wrong. You're taking on something that just seems overwhelming. What I will tell people is this. I don't want to brag on Jason Chaffetz or Ron Johnson in the Senate side, but there are people that you can go to and not be retaliated against. But unless you know that and trust it, I wonder how many people remain silent for fear of that unequal relationship between government and people.
Now, I know there's many people across the country that are optimistic, right? After 2016, that conservatives have the executive branch, have the legislative branch. Does that also make you uncertain as well or nervous whether it goes from all the way to the left to the right, supermajorities in either party?
I am cautiously optimistic under a theory that winning elections has consequences. I did not come up with that phrase, somebody else did, but it's still true. Winning elections has consequences. The president-elect will make judicial appointments subject to advice and consent. It's a beautiful system if we ever decided to fully use it. It's a beautiful system our framers gave us. The Senate can weigh in. The House controls appropriations, the executive branch. There are limits on all of the branches if everyone does their job. What I'm really most optimistic about is, you've heard me for 6 years now complain that the executive branch is too powerful. But every time I say that, our friends, not to go back to that media question, but my friends in the media will say, well, that's just political. That's just a crazy Republican congressman that doesn't like this administration. And I kept saying, I hope I live long enough to provide oversight over a Republican executive branch. I would say the exact same thing. I would ask the same questions. I've lived long enough. Hopefully, if I can make it to January 20th, I will have lived long enough. It's not a political fight to me. It is a constitutional, not quarrel, but constitutional analysis. Is the legislative branch going to stick up for itself? Is the judicial branch going to have the humility to say, you know what? We don't get to decide what the law is. We interpret it. We don't make it. We don't find liberty rights that nobody else has found for the last 250 years. There has to be a resetting of the equilibrium, and I'm afraid the best way to do it is with one party providing oversight over its very own party. If I were to send a subpoena I'm going to pick my friend Ryan Zinke, who's going to be the new Secretary of Interior. He just made me travel for 5 days in Montana on his RV with him driving, primarily in the emergency lane, because he fell asleep. Well, let's assume I wanted to provide oversight over Ryan Zinke. Number one, he's a friend. Number two, we're in the same party. It's viewed differently by you. It's not viewed as political, it's viewed as constitutional if we're doing it to ourselves. This is a unique opportunity to reset the constitutional equilibrium. So I'm excited. Here's what we can't do. You can't do it in the courtroom and you can't do it in politics. You got to underpromise and overperform. Do not tell people, it's what we did in 2010, it's what we did in 2014, which is why everybody is mad. We overpromised and underperformed. We set your expectations up here and the delivery was down here. So I'm setting expectations really low. If most of my colleagues show up sober on January the 3rd, I want you to be surprised. That's where I'm setting expectations. Then when we begin to do good things, you'll say, you know what? You know what? They actually kept their word. And slowly but surely, trust will begin to be rebuilt. Hopefully, that's my thought.
I'd like to close with a question about something really important you said to a young group of liberty lovers. You told them, quote, "You are the messenger that's going to change the world. I'm not asking you to be a Ronald Reagan or Abraham Lincoln. I'm asking you to live a quiet life of conviction and virtue and actually live out what you profess to believe. If you can do that, you will be a leader. You will be persuasive. And your generation will be the one that gets our country back on the right path. What can we do as individuals to preserve and protect this freedom of speech in America that you talked about?"
Well, I'll almost try to get through this without getting emotional, because it is emotional flying into an airport named for Reagan, a city named for Washington, and you got the monuments out the left-hand side of the window. And when you made the grades I made in high school, you never thought you'd ever be going to work in Congress. You never thought you'd be flying into Washington. And for the first 6 months, you get overwhelmed with the history out this side of the airplane. Jefferson, Madison, Lincoln, Reagan, all the big names of the past. And it takes a little while, but ultimately you start looking out the other side of the window at these gently rolling hills punctuated by elegant white crosses. And most of us can't name very many people who are there. So my question to you is, who built the country? The names you know or the names you don't? To me, it's the names you don't. That's the ones who volunteered to go fight. Those are the ones that have preserved and defended all of the rights you and I have been discussing. Yes, I'm thankful for those big leaders whose names we all learned in history. But the essence of America is those unknown, unsung heroes who just lived quiet lives of virtue. So what I try to say to people is, don't wait on me to do it. Don't wait on Tim Scott, no matter how great he is. Don't wait on whatever president you think is going to come in and fix whatever you think is wrong. That is not the story of our country. The story of our country, nameless, selfless, average, everyday Americans leading lives of virtue and conviction. That's what made us the greatest experiment in self-governance the world will ever know. And that's the outside, that is the other side of the window. Those are the names we don't know. So it's y'all, it's not us.
Well, sir, on behalf of Concerned Veterans for America and our tens of thousands of volunteers and military veterans all across the country, I want to tell you that we thank you for your service. To have a champion like you in Congress who is doing the right thing, who's protecting this country in a different way. And I want to thank the people in this room in Greenville, South Carolina. It's been great being here. And to the folks watching all across the country, maybe all across the world at home on defendthefirst.org, I encourage you to sign up for a mailing list. Stay in contact with Concerned Veterans for America. Follow us on Twitter @ConcernedVets. We've got comment cards for the people in the room. We'd love to stay in contact. Daniel Brennan is an outstanding grassroots leader. He looks forward to meeting every single one of you. Brandon Coleman, thank you so much for your service to this organization. And in closing, thank you very much. Have a great night. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Great job, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
It's so nice to get to know you.
Just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today. 'Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that